Welcome to the Consummate Athlete podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride.
So here we are, we're back. We're enthused about being on this Consummate Athlete podcast.
I mean, the fact that I can actually pronounce things this week is definitely a major step in the right direction. Speak for yourself.
I will mispronounce at least 4 words.
For sure you will. But yes, things are looking up from head to toe here. Still some issues. My ankle is still not like 100% healed.
But you have been doing cycling intervals outside and introducing flat pedals, not by choice.
No, not by choice at all. Hate them. No, it's funny. I was working on an article for Bicycling Magazine actually about improving your pedal stroke. And, a lot of the advice, there's kind of the two schools. There's the one that's like, get on a track bike or a fixed gear bike. And the other school is like flat pedals. So clearly I'm team flat pedals right now. And I think it is actually pretty helpful.
Okay.
It makes you notice stuff more, that's for sure. But yeah, it's been good to actually be back and doing like a bit of like heavier breathing on the bike, just between, ankle not being where it should be, and that literally where it should be, and then, not being able to really like breathe effectively through my mouth because of pain from stitches. It was a very slow couple weeks. I'm actually working on an article right now for consummateathlete.com talking about why I haven't been on Strava. Normally, let's be honest, most people who follow me on there know that I'm a morning run person. I'm not like a, great day out with the friends, 18 emojis in the title kind of Strava, but like, I just wasn't recording anything for the last couple weeks.
But you haven't really been doing, I guess you've been doing bikes. Like, what do you mean?
I mean, I've been riding most days, for the past 2 weeks. I just haven't been recording any of it.
Oh, I see. Okay. So that's not even Strava. That's just like you haven't really been recording stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, Strava is really the only place my stuff gets recorded. So, I mean, I guess technically it goes to Training Peaks too. Anyway, all that to say,
via your Garmin.
All that to say, we are finally getting back to feeling a bit more like an athlete and less like a recuperating shit show of a human, which is how I felt for the last couple of weeks.
And so today we've had a lot of questions. I've had a few phone consults. This is the season of the year, the fall season, the end of the season, the after the main race season, where these little adventures and ideas start cropping up for a variety of reasons, to do these like, fall adventures before the winter comes, or my season went crappy, so I need to like redeem myself, or I actually feel really good, so I need to empty the tank, because I have too much energy at the end of the season. So these ideas of running marathons and ultra marathons and huge bike rides and tours and trips and all sorts of awesome things and ideas pop up this time of year. And so we're going to just sort of wade through this idea of when that's acceptable, how to get ready for them, and when you may want to decline them or partially decline these big ideas.
Yeah. And I mean, it's tricky. And we've, before we hit record, have been going a lot of rounds on this because, on one hand, we don't want to say, don't do the adventure. After all, this is the Consummate Athlete. A lot of our whole ethos is this idea that, yes, like our whole hope is that you can take on different kinds of adventures. When we started this, it was so, we could do kite surfing or paddleboarding or whatever one day and then be on a mountain run the next day, and then a mountain bike the day after that, and a road ride the day after that.
And we do have a book called Becoming a Consummate Athlete, which is the idea, sort of has the main concepts and things around that, whether it's training or the gear organization, because now you have so much gear because you're doing all these things.
It's true.
But the idea is that you are training and armoring your body, if you will, to be ready to, maybe be even 6 weeks out from some of these things. So there is a training element. So it is a little different than not doing any of those things, or being very elite or specialist in cycling and then deciding you're going to take on a run tomorrow, which has been proposed. So that's what we're going to wade through. And I thought, your example of, you had your big race, your A race. So usually you would take some time off after that big A race. Certainly after something like 100-miler, people will take 1 or 2 weeks, not completely off of exercise or even off of running, but certainly there wouldn't be a ton in an optimal situation there. And then, you'd start building back. And so for you also had injury and mouth surgery. So you end up with this situation where you're actually like in a deep hole. You got to get back to the baseline where you actually are energetic and feeling good. And then I think there's still a bit of a need to just like reset it. And so that line of recovery, if you will, and motivation starts coming above baseline where you actually are motivated, because you were not motivated for the last 2 weeks. And then just probably yesterday, suddenly there was like a little bit more bandwidth and energy and motivation to get out and do something.
Yeah. And I mean, not motivated sounds like I'm like, oh, I'm never training again. That's not the case. Like, it was literally just like didn't feel good. So training was like very difficult. So I'd say like slight difference, but yeah, I mean, basically the same point for sure. And I mean, there is the fact like I ran 50 miles of the 100 that I wanted to do. So like really I'm just like 50 miles short of like hitting that, the season's over kind of like thing. So yeah, in some ways I'm almost lucky that I had this, weirdly enough, mouth surgery thing that really kind of like forced me to reconcile, like to take the time to like let this ankle recover a bit more, because I think if I hadn't had this, I probably would have been more inclined to do some dumb stuff on the bike in the past couple weeks.
Sure, and try and get raced back to it, and yeah, there's all these natural feelings, and I would like motivation's tough. Like, it wasn't mentally that you weren't motivated, but it is like you were not motivated. Like the example without the mouth surgery, you would have been motivated to start trying to do stuff again, right? And then you might have gotten an idea about doing, some sort of bike race or something like that.
Well, and we do have a bike tour, which actually is very helpful that I have to get ready for. We are going to Italy in October with Ingamba to do some riding there, so that's exciting for us. But that's like that's a pretty low key.
But I think a good example, right, where you now have decided, this was on the plan. We've known about this for a while. We've been, registered for it, so it's not like you didn't know that you were going to have to start riding. But that is sort of in your fall now, after running for, mostly for years with little cycling now. You now are getting ready to ride for 6 or 7. I don't remember how many days we're riding for, but a bunch of days in the mountains, on a road bike. So now you're going to have to prepare your body for that. And I guess the time is ticking because we're, it's 5 weeks maybe now out. So
yeah, barely.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the type of thing where, okay, we have time. You have done a lot of cycling in your life. You've done these European things. You've seen climbs. So that's always a nice thing, is that it's not completely out of like what you understand and the demands and the mental aspects and the fueling aspects. It is sort of related to, climbing mountains on foot, like, the fueling and even just the loading on knees. Like, I would be less concerned about your knees in this scenario. Whereas some of, the one example we had there was a client who's had a really busy year or two, is going on a cycling vacation similar to ours, 5, 6, 7 days of mountainous rides, 5-6 hours on the bike, probably from zero. Right. And again, without the running and endurance and fueling that you have. And then, so we have, again, 4 weeks, 5 weeks to get ready for that. Right. So it's these things where it's getting urgent and it's just like a big something that has some risk with it.
Yeah. Well, and even you are not immune to the like big adventure ideas. I mean, I think in the past week, you've now presented me with like 6 different options for fall adventures.
Well, I get invited. I'm fortunate and also unlucky that I have several friends who are quite into adventures. So there's like been a couple of big FKT, big ride type things that are up in the, 24-hour type range, which is pretty out of my preference and my ordinary. So it's sort of this like, oh, you want to go do it. It's sort of an adventure. There's still that allure of, getting your name in some sort of news thing that you broke the FKT for whatever that's worth. And then, the time with friends, right? And the memories from that sort of stuff. So it is tough. It's like, oh yeah, for sure you would do that. But then you have to think through that a little bit. Like, do you actually want to ride for more than 90 minutes? Which, 24 hours is a lot more than 90 minutes. You have to sort of think through it. And so that's, I guess, the idea. What else? Was there other things you were going to out me for?
Well, you did kind of think about this La Cloche silhouette
trail.
This
had been on my mind. That's not out anywhere, but that I didn't want to tell you so much about because you had your own running goals and I was trying to just like let you focus on that. But I had thought that this would be a year that I would maybe go for that, given that I had prepared all of August to run with you at Leadville. and I have done La Cloche many times now so I was considering this 50-mile mountainous run.
Yeah. Now, I do have to say, this reminds me of when we had David and Megan Roche on back in February. We did our like couples Valentine's Day episode, which is still like one of my favorite things we've done. And we were talking about how sometimes it can be really tricky when your partner has like a big goal that they want to do that's like kind of like similar to a goal that you wanted, or it's like something that like you want, and you can't do it for whatever reason, and it is hard. And I admit I was like not the nicest when you said you kind of wanted to do La Cloche.
You basically shut me down.
Well, to be fair, we have no time. I don't know when you're going to do this.
I don't know. Yeah.
But I think like what got me is, and I don't even know that you've actually seen it, is like I had La Cloche on for September. If Leadville had gone well and I was like rolling well, I think we would have rolled into going to La Cloche and going for it. So it actually was like my fall goal. That obviously is not going to happen. Although when you said it, I was like, well,
you did say that to me, and I said, there's no way you're going to be ready to do that.
I think I could be ready.
This thing is so, your ankles get broken like instantly in a best case scenario. Like no one gets out of that thing without rolled ankles. So it's a little dicey with your current state.
I think it'd be fine. I mean, it's already rolled, so.
I guess. I mean, that is the advantage. So I think based on scheduling, I'm going to have to leave that one for this year. But the one...
all that said, I would support you.
You did turn around yesterday and apologize to me, which I appreciated a lot. But I've also made choices work-wise and a few other things that just there aren't a whole lot of weekends, even just to prepare. And again, it gets back to, in an ideal world, which doesn't exist, I would be able to... I had a great couple long runs here, all of August and then into like this past weekend. And now I said to you after this weekend on Saturday, I had like a pretty solid... what was it? 27K, I think I rode. I don't know what that is in miles. 16 miles. Yeah. So certainly it wasn't like long, but for like long enough that I knew based on like what I've done previously ahead of running this rate thing, I was like, I haven't like been able to walk away from a run like this, like, and walk like a normal person and, and fuel. And I was like, okay, this seems like, if I was predicting, again, this is where having experience, you're able to say like, when I do this workout, this has gone like this afterwards, so you can predict, right? And that's a lot of the stuff is guessing at what's going to happen if I do this, and then trying to triangulate, okay, but like what other goals do I have in the future? Will this jeopardize these if I break my ankle at La Cloche, or if I'm just like, really sore? Because in the past, the first time Eric, my friend, and I, who we've had on talking about La Cloche, and who has done lots of adventures, we did this 2011, and it took us like 12 hours and a half or something. And I don't think either of us could walk normal for probably a month, like if I'm honest. And like my hip was sort of weird after, and we were younger, it was okay. But you do wonder, when we were racing mountain bikes in March and April of the year after, did this affect how well we would have done, the recovery, the training that comes after it? So yeah, so that's what we're always looking at is, how does this fit into the season? And then what is the downside risk? So, if we use the example of someone just jumping off their bike and running a marathon off of zero training,
for example,
we're pretty sure there's going to be an injury of some type there. Like a younger person maybe would be okay and would just be like not walking normal for a week or two, but then it's just so risky.
So your downside is definitely like, well, there's a couple downsides. So let's maybe like talk through them. There's like the potential injury risk, and both in training and on race day, there's, a couple weeks of recovery probably post race where they're just not going to be able to hit the like hard stuff because turns out marathon running is not easy. There's the few weeks of prep to like hopefully be like running instead of riding to get ready for.
Although some people are smart and they just don't worry about the preparation and they
just go right into it.
There we go. A lot of people get injured in training, so I can see why that seems smart. You just go in, and I always say if you arrive motivated and healthy and on time on the start line, that's pretty good.
I think that usually implies that you can do the sport that you're like signed up to do now.
Yeah. So it's that would be the risk, and then is it a risk? Like you'd want to look at the person. So 40-year-old man who hasn't run and is like, 40-year-old men tend to blow Achilles tendons and have a lot of ankle, calf, feet stuff, hamstring stuff. Like they're just tight, right? and getting more brittle. Anyone who has any sort of concern of energy availability, you're just going to, like, the risk for stress fracture would be so high, right? When you look at a marathon, it would be like me telling you to jump up and down 40,000 times, plus or minus. But it's like, what would you expect would happen? Like, at least you would be very sore, but you can see how the impacts are just becoming very, very high, on pavement and things like that. So yeah, I think that's where, when we're looking at the downside risk, you want to really assess, like, what else are you trying to do? And this is where we get into our 1 and 2 year goals, that if there is something coming next year that you want to get ready for that doesn't look at all like this challenge, i.e. you're getting ready for Unbound, but you've decided you want to run a marathon this fall, but you've never run, quote unquote, never, haven't recently run. It just doesn't, what you're giving up is that fall training that we always talk about, where you get out and you practice fueling and riding gravel and skills on gravel and what pack you want to use and what tires you like and what are those insert things they're talking about. Like, that's what you're giving up, because you're going to have 4 weeks where you can't, move very well and are going to feel tired and slow.
For sure. And then I think the flip side of that is, what's the upside? And I think this is actually, especially when it's like the fall adventures with friends, like, because I feel like often the fall adventures tend to be more on the spontaneous, like, friend-based side.
Sure.
Like, simply because most of us, summer is our main season. So fall is, like, we had that episode last week talking about, like, fall goals and, like, what to do when you don't have a fall goal. And I think this is how you fall into.
It's in the name. Yeah.
Yeah. You fall into, like, oh, a friend is doing X, Y, Z. And this is where also I think the fall stuff kind of, like, people drop out of things, so spots open up. So
sure.
I think a couple of the examples we have heard, actually, a couple of them are, I had this race entry, or my friend had this race entry and can't use it anymore, so, like, they're gonna give it to me. And it's like, it's so easy to see the obvious, like, oh yeah, of course I'll take that, because free race entry, like, cool. And or I'm doing, your friend's doing this thing, you happen to have that weekend free, you don't have any immediate goals, so you see how it's, like, very easy to kind of jump on that. So I think, it's easy to fall into these, but I think asking yourself, like, what is the actual upside? Because a lot of the time there isn't really one, right? Like, if doing a marathon has never been, like, on your bucket list, like, things that I want to accomplish in my life, like, it turns out this is a lifelong, like, unrealized dream of mine, like, it's going to be a long day where you're running a lot and then you're really sore. Like, maybe you could go cheer on your friend. And so, like, a lot of the time I think the upside is the time with friends, but I think you can do time with friends in a way that isn't going to break your body.
Probably, or as much, right? It would be, maybe you go backcountry camping and a little bit of hiking on that. Even something like a half marathon off-road is probably going to be less risky for most people because of the mixed up terrain and softer surface. You could use poles to mitigate that a little bit. Just a marathon on pavement is quite redundant, and you're on pavement, right? So there is that. And it's just very hard. Like, I'm trying to think of scenarios, like, say someone gave this to me, and it's tough because I could run a marathon right now. But say if I wasn't trained, or whoever's listening is not trained, the person who asked this one question about doing a marathon with no training, you could walk a marathon is the reality, right? You'd probably, again, be quite sore. And the risk, we've done hikes where I've been almost crippled at the end just from hip flexors going and things like that. So again, it's not without risk, but you probably could, they get those, the gaps on the times are quite big. So you could just decide you're going to, run 30 seconds every 10 minutes and finish a marathon, and whatever that would take. Like, I don't even know what it would take to walk that. What would it be? 40K? I
don't know, but I'd have a big question about your why in that case.
I don't know. Some of them are like parties and they give you free food along the way and you want to be part of it. So, I guess that's how I would go at it, is I would try and run, walk, and just try and mitigate it, make sure you have big shoes. But this is the tricky bit, is you don't know before you go in, is it going to be your feet or blistering or back? Like, it could be so many things. You don't know how to eat when you're doing it because you've never run and eaten at the same time. So yeah, it's tricky. But I think the idea would be, as Molly's saying, to try and think something between not doing it and doing it. You could certainly go and play with a run, play with a hike, go off-road, do something like that. Or, again, come back to a counter offer of, again, I'm doing Unbound next year. So yeah, let's go do a 200K gravel ride and really test the system here in the fall, because I've been doing gravel racing all summer and that's what I'm conditioned to. But I haven't maybe done, over 100K. Well, that would be my situation. Like I haven't really done, except for the one big bikepacking thing we did. But, so maybe I actually did also get invited on a 200K gravel ride this Sunday, which again is so far out of my usual and what I want to do. But there was lots of friends going on it. Now, if I was getting ready to do Unbound, that would have been a great thing and would have set me ahead and had good confidence going into next year and into the winter, but didn't necessarily align with anything I'm really thinking about doing with my life. So opted out of that one. But yeah, that would be something where, again, it was not so far out of my usual, right? Like I'm used to doing 100Ks. The 200K would be a stretch, but at least you're over that sort of like roughly 50% idea, which is a common thing you'll see that, you don't want to exceed. They talk about 10 and 20%, but you also see 50%. We don't really know where they call it. That's like the acute chronic ratio of like too much too soon. We've talked about that with Greg Lehman when he's been on, and we talk a lot about the TSS stuff and the fitness score, or what they call chronic training load versus acute training load. And that's all that's telling you is today or this week, how much different is that than your usual over, in that case, the last 6 weeks, but your usual this year, even how much different is this? And if it's at some point it's too much. And again, if you were an 18-year-old, what is too much can probably be a little more ambitious. If you're, already injury prone or have other, what we call red flags or risk factors, or just an adult, it's just going to be riskier. So that like 50% or wherever the like margin for error is, probably reduces.
Mm-hmm. Now, I guess like flip side, who are these challenges good for? Because I mean, now we've kind of made it seem like, oh, never do a challenge, which is not at all what we're saying. Mm-hmm. Because I think for a lot of people, these fall challenges can actually be really motivating and actually kind of kick you into staying, focused and motivated for these last couple of months, especially as, I mean, this week, weather is great. It's fine. It's still really easy to train, but we are starting to hit shoulder season where the weather is going to be up and down a little bit more. And it's going to be tempting to want to just hang up the bike shoes or the running shoes or whatever and, take that break.
So again, I think it's probably for everyone, assuming you're not injured, but there's probably a knitting challenge you could take on if you were injured or something. Your challenge might be more on the recovery side of things, I guess. But assuming you're otherwise uninjured and okay, I would say the people that this is for who haven't, who have had a busy, summer and haven't done a lot, maybe do have lots of energy left and are not injured, but have been training relatively well, right? We're all adults. It's not perfect. There's more. We'd all like to do a bit more. So if you have energy, I think that's fine. And you're not injured, that's another check mark. That's good. And then if it's in your rough area, again, I talked about 200K versus my 100K like usual, okay, that's okay. And then if it's with people, I think that's a good factor because now we're getting a social benefit. There's an upside. If it's a solo mission, I'm getting a little more suspect of it. Sometimes what we'll see is like the reason, the why, right, is really what we're saying. Like, why are we doing this? And it's like, well, it's a great adventure with friends, a great celebration of like the end of the season. In the same way that, something like your big A race is, we talk about it being a celebration of the work that's come. If you haven't had that celebration for whatever reason, yeah, like put it on the calendar. I think some of my clients, we always talk about sometimes these messages go to the wrong people, right? That you hear what you want to hear. So the people that are already wired up and have done 50 challenges this year and are, maybe
are like, yeah, new challenge.
If they were honest, yeah, exactly. Like the energy tanks are a little low. There's maybe a couple niggling injuries. They've done a lot of celebrating this year, right? I always say it's not a party if it happens every day. But for the other folks who, maybe are a little lower motivation, maybe not as confident, right? Like they try and everything's always within them that they do, but then it's hard because you never push your limits. Then I would say that's something to, those people aren't going to probably go too far beyond what's reasonable anyhow. These are the people that'll do 100K and they've been doing 60Ks and 70Ks, maybe have even done 100Ks, and their adventure is maybe just a new route, which is great. That seems completely reasonable and it's great. And if you embed some friends or a nice point to point up to a cottage or to a friend's house, back and forth, that's what one of our clients did. They rode massive, great ride. And it was a great building weekend as far as motivation. They rode I think triple or quadruple what they usually would do on like a long weekend, and got out to their friends. They sort of brought a little bag of like flip-flops and shorts and whatever, and cleaned up at their friends, spent the night at the cottage, and then biked their way back the next day, and just like massive weekend for them. But again, in their sport, it's not that much different than what they were doing. And then again, to your point, like sort of spurred what's normal and the motivation going forward off of that. So yeah, I would say it's those people, who have been training, but maybe have had to hold back, not because of injury, but just, life has been busy. Yeah. So I think those are good folks for that. I think the folks who, again, have some energy, have some time, but have some big stuff coming up in the early spring would be people that we really want to look at this stuff. And it isn't even like, it's almost like probably planned, right? Like get in that century ride now. So we have that checked off. Sometimes I'll ask the athlete, like, what do you think you need to do to be ready for this? And sometimes I don't disagree, but it's like more than I think they need to do. But we can never discount like the mental things they think they need to do mentally to be ready. And so some of those things are pretty ridiculous. We use ridiculous as like a complimentary word here, but they're becoming extreme. Like it's more than you need to do to do well in this event, but I get it. So with Unbound, I don't think, I think Sophia, who like wins it, right? Like, I don't think, she said like she hadn't done a 6-hour ride all season. She got one in before Unbound, I think, this year. Now, is she genetically talented and very fit and very young? But there's still a reality that like she's riding that distance, 200 miles very quickly. So then I always step back. I'm like, so if the youngest and fittest and, talented genetic doesn't have to do that, like, does it make sense that the rest of us who aren't the same genetics and youth and everything else would ride more? Right? Like it's sort of a weird thing. Sometimes you get it like, I need to train more than the most talented person, but then does that make sense? I can see the argument, but I'm like, I don't think that makes sense. We don't have as much time. We don't have the recovery capacity. We don't have the genetics to absorb it, but we're going to ride more. Okay. So all that to say, a lot of clients will have that 200K they need to get in before the 200 miles. And we've talked about that sort of metric to standard rough conversion of like, how much do you need to train for your goal? So I think that makes sense. I'd probably do the same. I like that sort of logic of the metric to whatever. Like I've seen 200 on my Garmin
I love
before.
how arbitrary that is.
Now, I would try and ride that on a pretty flat course, a pretty fast course. I might even do it on pavement, honestly. We do that with Leadville. Like I'll say, ride your race bike. So it's not as fast as I think the road century is fine, but I'll have the mountain bikers ride like the fastest, flattest. So it might be a gravel path. We have a century here, the Simcoe Loop, and it's a flat rail trail loop that goes sort of around Barrie, Ontario. And that's what we'll use a lot of times, something like that, where they'll be probably moving at 30 kilometers an hour on their mountain bike, but it's such a great, like making power on flat. Yes, it's on some gravel. They can work on their aero position. They can work on their fueling, but they get it done quickly. The fast people I coach, probably they do that, I don't know, like probably under 6 for sure, even on their mountain bikes, right? And then it's like, what a confidence boost. Like I've gone 30 kilometers an hour, which is much faster than most people are going to do at Leadville, right?
For sure.
But I have seen 160 kilometers go under my tires. So.
Right.
Yeah, so I would say that's an example of like something you might knock off in the fall that's like could be quite big and adventurous and with friends and can be low key, right? They also don't need to, we're not talking about pacing limits or anything like that necessarily with something like that.
Yeah, I definitely think you just mentioned low key, and that's a big thing for me. I think if you haven't already had this on your calendar and if it's like this new spontaneous thing, I do think like, how easy can it be? And I mean, this is again where I'm gonna come back to like La Cloche may not be the thing for us this fall, because that is not like a low key easy thing necessarily. That's like, okay, it's a 6-hour drive one direction. It's there's a lot of like gear preparation and like safety protocol and like a lot of stuff that goes into that kind of thing, like making sure that is as smooth as it should be. And I mean, the same is true for a lot of like these, big, like whether it's a backpacking or bike packing or, huge FKT, like how much prep is like really involved in this? Because I think a lot of the time we hear like the big exciting thing with a friend and it's like, yeah, this will be awesome. And then you're like, oh crap. This is going to be like a week of getting my gear ready. And like, oh, I need to turn on my like spot tracker and my InReach and get my backpacking meals.
It's a good point. Like how low key can it be? And again, this matters most when you're someone who's going to be doing an Unbound, a Leadville. There's some big goals in the horizon in the next year, the next 2 years, because that stuff is just logistically very, like, it's overwhelming, all that stuff. So why would you burn that energy now necessarily when you could do something, out your door that's much easier to, just roll into? The consequences are lower. Again, the downside risk. And you get a lot of the benefit, a lot of the experience out of it.
Yeah. Now, admittedly, like, I think I'm also still slightly jaded because Leadville was such a logistical, like, jigsaw puzzle of stuff that in my head now I'm like, I think it's going to be 5 years before I want to do anything that's even like slightly complicated. Like, I am so excited for this bike trip we have in October where we don't need to bring a bike. Everything is just organized. Like, I've never been on something like this. I'm very excited to see how it goes. But
sure. And I think that's, how close to max. So it is, again, if we looked at, what are you trying to get out of this Killarney thing? Okay, so there's a bit of the, like, getting the FKT and whatever, that, like, that dream of being in the news. There's a bit of that, but, increasingly I don't need that, or if I really look deeply in my soul, it's not something that, like, is really going to be that. But then it's like, well, maybe it's just, we really like that area, and it's, we've had some great backpacking, and our friends are a little wild, and our backpacking is also pretty aggressive, but more of a 2-night 3-day version of this where you are stopping to camp and enjoy some Ontario lakes. Is that more what we want to do? And it would be probably less effort and certainly less risky all around, right? Whether you're talking about like rolling ankles or just hurting yourself in some way, right? It would be much, and again, more friends can go along. By definition, the FKT is solo as well, right? So it is some of these things where it's like, you're burning that energy now. It's tricky. Yeah. And I would say, if I'm self-criticizing too, it's also, I am also not really sure exactly, what I want to do going forward even, right? Like my 1 and 2 year goals aren't super well flushed out. So it's also sort of like, rather than burning something that's like 100% off in one direction, there's also many shorter runs I could do around here. There's, quote unquote FKTs and Stravas I could chase and, try and steal from people or whatever, and still, do that from the door basically. Right.
Yeah.
So I do think that like binary, yes, no, I'm not running, I'm running a marathon. There's also the in-between of, why don't I just do the local 10K in October that actually is an event here that like would support local business and see everyone, and probably I could do okay in it, and people would be impressed that I can run. Like, okay, well, that seems to check a lot of boxes, and there's probably beer at the end of it, right?
It's true. You're not getting a beer at the end of the close. You're just getting
I guess I could bring my own beer, but you always want to have other people's beer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's sort of how I'm thinking through that. The other, we talked a bit about the why, but I wonder if we just sort of go through that like why checklist of, is this like, you need to almost like penalize yourself and empty the tank, like in your situation of you didn't run 100 miles. It's not that you had a ton of energy, but I imagine in the week or two that comes, you're going to start being like, I have so much energy, I need to run like another 50 miles or something. Could very well happen. And again, if you didn't have so many injuries and surgeries, I would imagine you would have a stronger feeling in that direction. So then the question is like, should you do that? Or is it better to actually take the rest period, go into the winter with some motivation and some energy and not injured and not energy in an energy deficit or with a stress fracture or whatever else, and go back to the training, right? Like open up the Joe Friel training manual and start in base 1, right? Like a little bit of cross training, not a ton of volume, not a ton of structure, and then like start building up from a great place of like your body is not in a deficit when you're starting the training process. And you see that so often where it's like, I emptied the tank for no reason, like after the race, all the World Cups or the Nationals or the bucket list race was done, and then I did this other random thing and just injured myself.
Yep.
Right. And an injury here could be illness, injury, acute injury, chronic injury. Oh, my back just aches all the time. I have a knee that's been bugging me. Why? Right? Like, I can see what you're doing. Like you have the energy, like now or never, FOMO, whatever. But there is the option where you just resist the need for like the reward of the like, whatever, the news or the Strava post you're going to do. And you go back training. And what if in the spring, the summer, you come out at a new level because you weren't injured and you were motivated for many months to train, in a nice linear-esque way. Is linear-esque a word? I don't know. But like a way that, is more, when you're betting on it, it's reasonable and consistent.
Yeah, for sure. Which, I mean, is part of like the longer term planning thing. Like, that's why I'm so happy we had this bike trip on the calendar, is because it actually gave me like this very gentle, again, even if Leadville had gone really well, it kind of gave me this gentle like next thing that I needed to get ready for, because whether or not I had the fitness from Leadville, I would have needed to get back on the bike regardless. So like it actually was going to push me in like this direction that I wanted to kind of be nudged in, where it's like, okay, here's this like fun new adventure thing, but it's not going to push me like afield of my goals. It's just kind of like this nice little parallel track.
And that's a little different than your usual stance of, not having like another race on the calendar, but this is lower key, I guess.
It's not, because that's lower key. There's no finish line. Like, the point of these trips isn't to get to the top of the mountain first. Like, all I need to do is be able to like my goal is to comfortably be able to ride it and like actually enjoy myself and not feel like I need to like be huffing and puffing my way to the top of the mountain.
And I do see this with a lot of clients will do that with the bike packing, but also more backpacking, hiking, where they're like, and this can be in the summer. This could be like they're going to race in the spring, and then they might still train for biking, but we sprinkle in some strength training and some actual hikes to get ready for, I'm going to go do this trip out west or wherever it is with a friend, my sister, whatever. And it's 3 to 7 to 10 days. Some of these things are quite long, so demanding. But again, the risk on a backpacking trip is you're going to be sore. Your shoulders are sore, like your ankles, whatever. But it's pretty rare that someone comes back with something that lasts more than a day or two. You have a lot of bug bites or something. So that to me is a great one that I see a lot of people do, where it checks a lot of the time in nature, low key. You are exercise. You're very tired at the end of the day.
You're with friends. It's like a big, like it is an adventure. It's like a very different thing.
Sure.
So yeah, I like the idea of having more of these fall adventures, and we've actually done the hiking trip in the fall before and had a fantastic time with that.
Yeah,
like I would do that like 11 out of 10. I think that's what we'd be doing had this bike trip not come up.
So we talked about the emptying the tank reason to do it / like punishment. I would be super wary of that. Like, there's no need. I think
anytime you feel like you're like making up for something in the fall, that's to me just like a major red flag.
Really careful with it. Yeah. Yeah, because that can blur into the the people who have otherwise been training well but didn't get to do quite as much. But those people I'm thinking about are didn't really race very much. They're whatever. I've had clients coming back from pregnancy, just really job changes. The kids were at that age where they were just running all summer to different stuff, and then finally in the fall the kids go back to school, or the kids are finally going to school, or whatever the situation is, and it's like, I have some time to myself. I'd like to go do this 200K gravel event. I have 2 months to get ready for it. September and October. It's at the end of October. That to me sounds great, right? And it's probably a little ambitious for the person, but especially with cycling, again, when we look at the risk of things, cycling tends to not be, the downside isn't usually as big on the acute side of things because our weight is supported. But anything that looks like, CrossFit competition, running, what else would be super risky?
Have you done anything like this in like recent history?
And the runway, right? Like one of the examples we had is, pretty short runway into a run marathon with zero training, given that like the other stuff that's going on. And so, yeah, like how divergent is this from your goals? And then where is the timing, right? Because there's also we talked about the why, but there's also the why now. And some of these running marathons, I get it. Like I've done the bucket list, fall marathon, but it was a year that it was when I was still working with Steve Neal, and we blended the training in. The provincials that year weren't as important, or whatever was left in September. So I trained a bunch of August. We did a bunch of testing and lactates this and grooving the pace and fit in some like test sort of like distance runs, gradually built up. Then in September, I got like the volume built up pretty quick. But again, I was a younger man at that point. And then I ran a great marathon, aside from a couple of bathroom stops. And then couldn't walk for like a week, but then again, younger man, and I was okay. There was no like lasting thing with that. But again, that was like 2 months of prep versus walking into a marathon, right? Like you can see how there's like a little bit of a spectrum there.
Well, and nor did you have any like goals that were going to be like hampered by that necessarily. Like
No,
you knew you
and
were
I've
racing
always-
like the next season, but
Yeah, and I mean, it also fit into the larger thing because we would do a lot of running throughout the winter. At that point, I wasn't going south as much or at all. I don't recall if I was going. Maybe I would go south that year. I don't know. But you know, I would run and like snowshoe and pole run and do all this stuff. So there was like, it was sort of like edged into what was going to be the off season and base training anyhow. Yeah. So that would be an example with that. So we had as far as again, the reasons people do this, it's like this release, you know, but we're careful with the punishment, careful with the emptying the tank. Could we spread that energy over another training block and really think towards those spring and summer goals? And I think that idea is like the opportunity cost, right? Of like, if you do this, you're going to give up things. And are you okay with that? And sometimes people are like, yeah, this is the year. I will never have another chance to run a marathon. I have the entry to this thing randomly. I'm just going to send it. And I don't care if like I don't walk and I'm in a boot. Like thinking through the like worst case, you know, what are we scared of? With this, and some people will take on that risk, and you know, some people do amazing things off of the couch. Like it could happen, but you need to be prepared that this could mean 6 weeks of not riding or running or exercising. You know, you could have these risks, right? You may not very well. You know, you might just be sore and tired for a while, but if you take on that risk, it would be looking at those opportunity costs is important. Mm-hmm. Okay,
Love
what
it.
else is on that outline then?
Well, I think the only last thing that I kind of wanted to note here is, I think, you know, in addition to like these fall adventures, I think there is also the like fall vacation and like the training on that. And I think this gets into like what we talked about last week, where it's like, if you don't really have any like main goals. So I think maybe our PSA here is if like one of your fall adventure things is in fact like you have a family vacation or like a big like family event coming up. I know the holidays are still not here yet, but like we are. And God knows, like we're starting to kind of think about it already because, you know, it's here before you know it. It's also okay to have a vacation in the fall too, like we talked about last week with the off season stuff. I think there's this like tension in the air right now to have like the last fall hurrah and do the big thing, but it's also okay to, as we kind of said here, ease through fall, doing our training like mindfully, thoughtfully, like thinking towards next year. And that can include an off season, a vacation, a fun weekend with friends
Probably
at the cottage that
people,
doesn't involve like, you know, let's see how far we can, you know, ride our bikes off the dock into the lake. And, you know, like we don't have to have all of these like wild competitive last surges. We can actually just enjoy fall.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's how most people that I work with would be in this sort of, they race in the summer, they finish the race, and then the fall, a lot of times is this, you know, you could call it preparation or base phase or something like that, where it's just early and maybe we start sprinkling in some runs and some run walks and the strength comes back. But that doesn't mean that you don't go on fun mountain bike rides or gravel rides, whatever their sport is. Again, chipping away at skill stuff. We spoke about this last week with our like, what is fall training episode, where you're still working away, but then even within that, there's the flexibility of like, yeah, your family's going away, you know, there's a tournament you're going to, and just, you don't have to train every weekend. Again, there's the flexibility that you could take Saturday, Sunday off, and then just go back, train Monday through Sunday the next week. It can be a little more flexible like that because now we're bringing in more cross training. You can sort of mix things a little bit like that, right? Where you might strength train on the Tuesday, but you could do a long ride on the Monday because you're off work for a holiday or whatever it is. So yeah, it can be a lot more flexible, but it also isn't maximal at this time of year in any sense of the word, like in the volume, the intensity, the focus, the risk, the whatever, right? I think all that stuff is generally lower at this time of year, right? The specificity is lower because we're cross training. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. And finally, if you do have the big fall adventure, or you have signed up for the race or committed to the thing and you're like, oh crap, I have 8 weeks to get ready for this or 4 weeks to get ready for it. You know what you can do to get ready for it? you can book a phone consult.
Yeah, that and the 3-month custom plans, they are commonly what people do, right? Like we're not against these things, and we would ideally have that, 4 to 6 to 8 to 12 weeks to get ready for the thing. But that's often what those things look like is, hey, I'm going to go on this bike packing trip in 4 weeks. Like, get me ready for it. Or
so if you've listened to this and started to panic, head to consummateathlete.com and book a phone consult and talk through how to realistically train to get to the big, scary fall adventure that you have booked. So there we go. All right. As always, hit us up with questions. ConsummateAthlete.com has a contact page. You can find us on Instagram at Consummate Athlete. I am at Molly J. Herford. Peter is at Peter Glassford. We would love to hear from you. Keep the questions coming. And definitely hit us up with nutrition questions, because we actually have a dietitian coming on soon to kind of do a bit of a Q&A. So hit us up with any nutrition, whether it's training, racing, life, whatever questions. We would love to hear from you. All right. Thanks so much for tuning in. Happy training, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.